And good morning, fellas. This is March 13, 2024, and it's dark outside. Daylight savings, there's an upside and a downside. I for one, I prefer daylight savings. I would actually vote, if we had to vote, I would prefer daylight savings year round because I'd like more light in the evening versus the other, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not asked to vote. So let's get started. We're in, of course, John's Gospel. We're deep into chapter 15. I'm having the time of my life, and I'm very excited and happy about what we're going to talk about this morning and with Jesus and his disciples. So let's dive into it. Last time we looked at um, what I called it, I phrased it this way. Again, Jesus is preparing his disciples for what is about to occur. They are a bit terrified in regard to his language about leaving, but he's assuring them, and he really brings that intent to a pinnacle point in this section. And so as I'm pondering how Jesus is preparing those disciples 2,000 years ago, the correlations are to us as disciples in the year 2024. And the way I've cast it from last week as a way to think about it is we remain. He's talking about being remaining in the vine. We remain through keeping. We keep through listening. We listen by being attentive, and we are attentive by knowing our question. And we watch for coincidence. That's what we talked about last week. That is an absolute mouthful. Here are the key ideas, the 6 ideas. And this is stated like this on a slide. So you can, if you desire, you can go back and look at it and think about it, what that means. And I'm proposing this as a way to think about being his disciples right here and now. In chapter 15, 11 through 14, we continue. Jesus said, "These things I have spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. This is the commandment that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that a person lay down his life for his friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command." So let's take a look at that. This is a really monumental section. Well, they're all monumental, but this one really like this. So what I got, first of all, is a major heading in verse 11 is Jesus's why that's undergirding everything. You know, he's gone through, well, the incarnation occurred, John chapter 1. Jesus was raised in Nazareth. He called 12 disciples, as we've seen in the recent chosen. We've all enjoyed that. Jesus is interacting with people. He has followers. He's taking them somewhere. And it's at this point within the Gospel of John that John is really dialing it in through the words of Jesus, what this is all meant to be. These things that I have spoken to you, disciples, is so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be made full. It's not there yet, but my intention for you, disciples, is that it is so. Jesus, in my opinion, is clearly stating his intent for what he has communicated thus far. It's in the past tense. Now, before we move on, this is not a warning. I think it is our human propensity that as we read a text like this, we attach words like, he that doesn't abide in the vine, the vine dresser cuts the branch off and burns it. And we create all kinds of unnecessary imagery around those things, and we take it as a personal warning. That is not his intent. It's not a warning. Quite the contrary, it's that those may have joy and that the joy would be made full. Secondly, it's not a pep talk to motivate the disciples to lace up their bootstraps tighter so they can do a better job. Again, that's a human construct that's imposed upon the text, and it's prevalent. I mean, we've all done it, and we all naturally do that, but it's not his intent. Rather, he's speaking to them so that what is true of him at this moment will be true in his disciples from here on out. He is imparting something to his disciples. He is choosing to continue his presence through his disciples. And that presence will be peppered with the idea of joy. He's speaking from a place of joy. And quite frankly, this is difficult to grasp given what he's about to do. I've got a placeholder on that idea. I don't understand that. With what he's about to face, and I believe he knew what he was about to face, just my perception of who he is. How he's speaking out of joy at this moment, I certainly have not separated that in my mind. If I were about to face the cross, I don't think I would be speaking out of a place of joy. But but that is true of him at this moment. His entire intent is that their joy, the disciples, will notice it says be made full. That means it hasn't occurred yet, but it will occur. Jesus gets what Jesus wants, and that is his intent, meaning that joy will govern all they do and say. This is his intent for a follower, that the follower operate out of joy in all they say and do. So his directive, which is based on this why, is a big one. This is my commandment. Listen up, disciples of the first century, and we disciples of the 21st century, we too listen up. This is my commandment, Jesus says, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Here is directive for what is to come. This is a major tipping point, transitional point. There could be others within this text, but it's certainly here. And his directive is based on this reasoning, which I have in a graphic. You've seen this graphic. We've used it already. We're going to extend the graphic. It is my belief that the Father extended love, which I'm thinking of it as a life-giving energy, like a battery, a potential, a charge, electricity, power. So that is how I'm thinking of this relationship. And guys, again, it's a metaphor, okay? It's something graphic, something material that we can sink our teeth in. So please accept this as a metaphor. a metaphor of life-giving energy. Jesus always spoke of himself in relation to the Father. And I think that's absolutely critical. He's modeling to us how we as disciples can think as well. So you have the relationship between the Father and the Son, and love has been extended from the Father to the Son. Behold, my Son, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. So the question then, as we have talked about already, is what is the degree to which the Son can receive this love energy, just like a switch or a device that's on an electrical circuit. To what degree can that device utilize that energy that is being given to the Son? Okay. And it's all about flipping the switch on, allowing it to occur. It's not trying to make it happen, it's just simply allowing it to happen. And I call that reception. You know, to as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. So we're looking at the person of Jesus, but we're also indirectly looking at what can be our experience as well. So the Son, Jesus, sees himself in relation to the Father. He sees himself as one, first of all, and primary, one who is loved. That is absolutely critical. And I keep going back to that over and over again. He sees himself as loved through reception. Because of that, the love has been transferred, again, using our metaphor. And because the Son receives love, the Son can love, in this case, the Father, and also the follower, the 12 disciples and others, whoever is following him, his relationships. The Son can love because the Son has been given capacity to love, a potential to love. And he can love the follower. We've already talked about all this, but we're going to go somewhere with it. Now, the same scenario is present, and that is, to what degree can the follower in the first century and the follower in the 24th century receive the love? The love. Now, we have in our ways constructs of building constructs, in our organized churches, we've defined what reception means. But I say not so fast. Maybe we ought to take a look at it. Reception is in the here and now. Reception, receiving the love. And when you and I receive the love, we see ourselves as one who is loved. We embrace that idea. And again, that is challenging. And as we embrace the fact that I am loved, we too can love one another. There it is. This is my commandment, fellas, that you love one another just as I have loved you. This is a graphic representation, a metaphor of what I think he's talking about. Right here, this little area within the diagram, Jesus is not introducing a new idea. Rather, his directive is an extension of what his disciples have already experienced. You love one another just as I have loved you. This is another reason to think about the incarnation, the incarnation event as an event, not now that event culminates at the cross, but Jesus has already loved his disciples as they have experienced, and he will continue to love them, and that is going to culminate on what is about to happen. So he's talking about not something new, but something they can gravitate and hook into. Love one another just as I have loved you. We have time, we could talk about how they perceived all that, but maybe we'll get to that at the table time. So I've got a series of 4 slides now, and I really want us to think about this idea. This verse I've been thinking about for about 3 weeks, actually. Greater love has no one than this, that a person lay down his life for his friends. For much of my adult experience, I have thought of this as, well, of course. It's kind of a shellacking over. Well, of course, Jesus died for our sins, and that shows a great love. But it's more, I viewed it as more of a sentiment, or I think there's more to grasp here, and I'm going to take a stab at it. He's talking about greater love. Greater love has no one than this. You go, well, I get it. Well, do I get it? I'm going to say maybe not so fast. Let's take a look at it. And this is what these series of slides, and again, a metaphor. 2 things here. We're going to move the circle to this idea of I am one who is loved, which is absolutely critical. And now Jesus, at this juncture, makes a switch from talking in the past tense, love others as I have loved, past tense, you, and he's going to talk about future tense, laying down his life. He says that the love which he has demonstrated will be fully revealed in what he is about to do. That's my perception. He's exposing them to what will occur within the next 24 hours, 12 hours. Greater love has no one than this, that a person lay down his life for his friends. Number 2, and through what he is about to do, he labels the disciples themselves as friends. This is new. They were friends, we know that. They interact on the chosen like friends. But here Jesus calls them friends, and that's important. Now we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. So here we are on slide number, I guess it's 1. I guess the other one was an introduction. I think I've got 4 of these slides. So let's go back, let's rewind a minute, and let's think about this idea of one who is loved. And that person primarily is the person of Jesus, who realizes he is loved by his heavenly Father. But it can also mean you and I as followers, as we become aware of the fact that we are loved, that I am loved personally, and that you are loved personally. So primarily, we're going to be looking at Jesus, secondarily at the follower. You've seen the battery, you've seen the yellow arrow as life-giving energy. And in this case, what is new about this diagram is there's a barrier, there's a wall. And we're going to talk about this. Okay, on this side of the wall is what actually exists. It's what's real. It's what's in the material realm, okay? Well, of course. Yeah, but there's more. To love is an ability extending from one who has received. Remember, we can't love unless we've received love. And to the degree that we've received love, can we give love? That is the primary idea. But right now, it's I have received, and I have a potential because I have received of how I will extend that love to another, but there's a barrier. How love will be demonstrated is unknown. It's still in the realm. Notice how everything is kind of fogged out. It's more transparent because it's not in the realm of what exists yet. It's what I call possibility. Think of that word is huge. Possibility. There's what exists and there's possibility. And that possibility is a big question mark. There are actually numerous that arrows representing, there's more than that. There are numerous arrows representing possibilities of how that love could be transferred. Now, think of life like this. Think of life as walking through moment by moment in your responsibilities, and you're doing taxes, and your coffees, and your lunches with people, and interactions with families, as you are in the now, and as soon as you make a choice, that choice moves you from possibility to what actually exists. So there are numerous possibilities in what my next action is going to be, and what that next action is, it moves it. Can you think of it as 2 points on a wave? You've got what exists, and you've got the possibility of what may exist. And life is a series of steps from one to the other. And he's saying within that, fellas, here is the greatest possibility, greater love. Okay, greater love. And there's also what may exist. There is also numerous recipients. So as you and I go through life, day by day, moment by moment, in all the interactions that we have, every step we take, there is a possibility. There are numerous possibilities of how we can move. And when I make a decision and you make a decision, those possibilities become realities. And there are numerous recipients as well. Now let's take this to slide 2. And Jesus is saying, we know a little bit now about the idea of this possibility, of this reality possibility way of thinking in your life and mine. And notice the battery got super big because I'm taking the words of Jesus and saying greater love. Well, how is it greater? Well, let's call it bigger. Bigger means greater. So it's a bigger battery. Okay, just bear with me on this. And what Jesus is saying, again, life-giving energy. This is an expansion of the prior slide, but through the act, what Jesus is saying in verse 13, through the act of laying down one's life for another, the greatest possibility of all possibilities is chosen. So think about that for a minute. Of the numerous possibilities, but Jesus is saying this is the best one. This is the best one. We haven't defined what best is yet, but it's just depicted as bigger. It's the bigger possibility. When a possibility is chosen, this is really important. When you and I choose a possibility and it becomes a reality, all other possibilities are eliminated. That is absolutely critical. There's choices that I have made and you have made that cannot be retracted. There are choices, there's some really great choices we've made, which are the best, the greatest possibility. But there's choices that I make every day on how I interact that are probably less than what is the best possibility. And once that choice is made, everything collapses. And what's interesting about this is that mathematically, this is proven true. This was proved in the 20s and 30s, or after Einstein's great formula of to show the equation of energy and matter. They were getting into the quantum physics realm that we're not going to dive into. But this very formula has been proven. I forget who the scientist was, but at the quantum level, this is true. And the idea, and what I'm doing is applying that truth, is once a choice is made, all other possibilities are eliminated. So we're not talking about smoke and mirrors here. We're talking about something that actually exists. Now, remember, the only reason that any of this is possible, this is like, okay, guys, let's stop here for a moment and let's just rewind, because this is so critical. Everything hinges on this idea. And that idea is right here. The only reason this is possible is because Jesus has received from the Father what he calls the greatest love. Now, what's interesting about, we could dive into this, but the Father didn't die on the cross. Jesus is going to die on the cross. But in order for Jesus to experience the greatest love, he had to receive that from the Father. So dying on the cross is an example of laying your life down for another, a very straightforward example. But where I'm going to go with this is that it is the only reason Jesus can do that is because it was given to him from the Father. So a really interesting question of discussion would be, how did the Father experience the greatest love? Well, that's going back to the primary source of everything. Jesus died on the cross. And then the question is, what does laying down our life for another mean to you and I? Do we have to go to the cross? I don't think so in one regard, but absolutely in the other regard. It's always about laying down our life. And that where we'll talk about that. So here's the third slide. And we're going to move laying down our life. The question here is, what does Jesus mean by greater? So now we're going to talk about this big battery. Why did I make it a bigger battery? Because Jesus calls it greater. Well, in what regard is it greater? We tend to plop it with one of many possibilities, but holds a huge sentimental value. Well, according to Jesus, it's absolutely everything. As already stated, one can only give to the degree which one has received. I've said that now about 5 times because it's so important. I receive, and only to that degree can I give. And that receiving is, that extension is contingent upon my ability to receive. And that's of one who, as I said, Jesus says, I'm one who is loved. Whoa. Therefore, what Jesus is talking about, okay, this is how I'm defining greater. I'm using the term efficacy. It's the efficacy of the love. And I'm calling it an efficacy transfer. Now, I just made up that. I mean, those are words that exist. But this is how I'm thinking about it. Again, guys, I'm using metaphors here. Note, the idea of efficacy is the ability to produce an intended result, that it has power, its effect, that the kind of love that he is talking about has the greatest effects of all possible effects on so therefore it's a quantity. The quantity of this is, I think, in terms of quantity, is much larger. He's talking about, of all the possibilities of how love can be transferred, here is it. This is it. This is the greatest of all possibilities. And I call it efficacy because this is his intent, to transfer his disciples, to transfer this level of energy to others, to others. Love, he says, it's clear, love one another as I have loved you. This is what he's talking about. Through his coming act, which is love's greatest life-giving potential, it's there, but it all has to just be received. It will be made possible to anyone who receives it. If we receive it, we are his follower. He's going to make a comment about that here in a minute. And here's the last slide on that one. So how Jesus talks about this right here. Preceding the act. Okay. Okay, preceding the act is the governing perception. Okay, that's true of anybody. I act out of how I perceive, and that's true of everybody. In this case, the perception is fueled by the love energy which has been received from the Father. This creates an entirely different way of seeing the other. This is, I'm talking about the fact that he's addressing them as friends. He's moving from disciples to friends. That is a term of endearment. And it's because he sees them as endeared. He sees them relationally. It's a familial relationship on how he sees them. And he sees them differently because the Father has given him the energy to see. This creates an entirely different way of seeing the other. And because I see differently, I act differently. Example. I've heard this numerous times. Mother Teresa could say she saw the face of Jesus within the brokenness of those whom she ministered. She was in, her daily life was in horrible situations, dealing with people who were in abject poverty and sickness. And her response numerous times is she says, I don't see, well, she says, I don't see the person. She wouldn't say that. She says, I see the face of Jesus. This is what I'm talking about, is that when you and I receive this level of life-giving energy from Jesus, the Father, that gets to theological discussion, it dramatically affects how I see. And if I see different, I act different. And in this case, Jesus is demonstrating that right here and now, because he calls his disciples friends. He's going to go into that next week. He says, you are my friends. This is where we're going to leave it for today. What this means for you and me, he says, you are my friends if you do what I command you. That's true. Think of it like this. Jesus is stating the truth that those who receive the greatest love within the moment through embracing, I am loved regardless, I'm one who is loved. These are the ones that have the efficacy within that moment to extend this level of love energy to others. Now, I think all of us intuitively understand that. Practically, day by day, in a moment, in a heated moment, an argument, is when we get opportunity to apply that, to back off. And, how can I respond in this moment out of love? This always involves a dying. Greater love has no one than this, than man lay down his life for his friends. And it always involves a dying. That dying takes on a different shape and form numerous times. And when we do so, it's what it means to be his friends. This, in my mind, I've got that bracketed last statement. It's about function in the moment versus a one-time expression of intent. I was raised, and I'm not opposed to this, but I think it's just part of the picture. Receive Jesus as your savior as a one-time event, and I think it's about receiving Jesus in the moment, and to the degree that we do that at that moment is the degree that I can extend what he's asking me to extend, which is love, through my flesh. So table time. Within this session, well, we looked at this really important section within what Jesus is saying to his disciples in preparation. This is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that a person will lay down his life for his friends. And I left it there. I left off 14. and I'm, because this is so loaded, I think I'm just going to give some suggestions, and then we're just going to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. But, what does this mean to you? What questions might you have? What, as we've looked at it in this regard, what does it mean to you? What does this look like through you? As you and I attempt to love one another, we're familiar with that directive. What does it look like? Another question could be, tell us about your learning. What are you learning about loving one another just as I loved you? And we'll feel any kind of example. I've got way more negative ones than positive ones, but we're in the process of learning. Being his disciples is a learner. And then I think this is the last one. At this time, what do you feel is your barrier? Now that would take some courage to share that, but what is your barrier in loving one another as I have loved you? So let's open that up. Any of those, we're not going to discuss all those by any means. We'll barely get through one or two of them, but what are your thoughts, fellas? I've given a lot of metaphor ways, tried to give something that we could relate to about loving one another. Love is everything here. As he's moving and preparing, but quite frankly, I live in a world that there's not a whole lot of love. There's a lot of separation, a lot of arguing amongst those of us who call us Christ's followers. So what do we do with this? Carl, do you have a point? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's a point or whatever, but
Okay.
I I wonder how many times I or we, I don't know, think about when we're around others. Do we ever ask ourselves? I've never asked myself, how am I loving uh, Eddie today,
Great.
or
Yeah.
John, or Sue, or whoever we're in relationship, drinking coffee together, or working on a job together. I'm working on a repair job with a couple this week, and they have been so gracious. This job was greater than I could do, so Ginger accompanied me, and she's been just giving me some excellent help. And Eddie and Judy, they've just gone out of their way. Judy says, "I'll fix something to eat. What do you guys like to eat?" And we had to. I had to go home and do a little repair on this job, and brought the part back, and Judy had supper all ready for us, and
Wow. Wow.
I start making the repair, and she said, "No, let's stop and eat first." And oh my goodness, they were showing me love.
They were loving you, Carl.
I know it. And it's like, oh my goodness. I just, wow, but maybe it would be a good thing for us to put in our brain or whatever. How am I loving this person that I'm relating to today?
I That
Wow.
is so good, Carl. Thank you for sharing that. It's certainly
Yeah,
where my head has been. It goes back
boy.
to last week where what is our question? What is my question for the
Yeah,
how can I love you at this moment? Um, you know,
yeah.
that
Wow.
that's a good question. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Carl. Other
Thank
what are the
you.
rest? Yeah, what do the rest of you think?
Well, nobody else jumped in here yet, so I will.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah. Uh, gotta, what I'm going to say, I think you got to kind of shift your perception filters just a little bit. I couldn't help while I was listening, you, Mike, to go step by step through these things. I couldn't help it, but I kept remembering the Energizer Bunny,
Yeah,
the commercial. Now, bear with me just a second.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, I have a feeling that most of us, I mean, first of all, probably all of us on the call, we remember the Energizer Bunny commercials. They
yeah,
were very effective. Most of us, too, probably at one time or another, we're sitting there, we're watching something, and here comes this commercial, and it's this bunny that's running around and happy and, doing all this. And, give me a break, stupid bunny running around. But you know what? That's exactly what you're describing here.
yeah, yeah,
The bunny represents somebody who's so full of this energy that he can't help but share it.
yeah,
Now, maybe he ought to be a little more in control about how he's going from point A to point
yeah,
B.
yeah,
I don't know. But he's overflowing with it, and he's got to find a place where he's got this power.
yeah,
He's got this energy, and he wants to be able to plug it in somewhere.
yeah. That's really good.
So, so it's a metaphor, really, of what we're called to do. We've been given this energy. Where do we plug it in?
Yeah,
And for me, as I've stated again and again and again, I think that's where we have to listen and be sure that we're being who he wants us to be before we do something, instead of just running around willy-nilly and plugging in without thinking about it or finding out if that's really where we're supposed to be. But I hate to, this is not nearly as pretty an analogy as you've used, Mike, but we're all called to be Energizer bunnies.
yeah. David, that just really hits the nail on the head. I really like that a whole lot. Um, and Totsi, I see that hand. Just hang on a minute. But this is where I have been thinking, Dave, about the idea of coincidence. You know, coincidences come to me. I don't, I'm not trying to manufacture where the bunny's going or whatever. But if I can apply that energy, if I have energy, at the moment of that coincidence, or at least ask, what does this mean? That could really have some really good effects on that. So thank you, David. Totsi, what are your thoughts?
And I think I've told this before, but early on in my walk, I was leaving a Bible study, and the main point was the unconditional love of God. And one of the members, who was a long, big, quite influential in the church, okay, uh, brought up the fact to argue against that, and started quoting scripture and everything else. So the long story how that relates to this is that if there is judgment on our part, it's a barrier to either receiving or giving the unconditional love of, like God does, to others.
Yeah,
And so I think the element of and this is where a case where somebody was using the scripture as a hammer. Okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to. So to me, the illustration of unconditional love of God for us, we need to actually use that if we're going to lay down our love. If we're going to love somebody else by laying our love down there, there's got to be it's got to be unconditional. Anyway, that's what my
yeah.
thoughts on it.
Well, that's true, and that's a great reminder. John, yeah, what are your thoughts?
So I would ask a question. What is what is the difference between a disciple and a friend?
What do you guys think? Is your question, can I ask you a question back? Is your question what is your question this, that when Jesus stated this verse and he used the term friends to his disciples, what that meant to them beyond where they were already?
Yeah, something's changed. So I thought he said, "This is a new commandment I give you," and actually, excuse me, he did say that 2 chapters before in John 13. So Jesus is saying to them, has been saying, he says, "This is a new commandment I give you," right? Different than the other ones. So the other ones were love God with all your heart, soul, and might. And then Jesus added, love your neighbor as yourself. So that was their world, right? That they had lived in. And then he says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. This is how people are going to know if you're my disciples. Now, a little more time goes by, and now he says, now I call you friends. So my thought is, what's different? What's transpired? Are we disciples? Are we friends? Does Jesus see us as friends? What happened here? What's going on?
Dave, it's okay. Thanks, John. Dave, you were doing that thing with your hands. What are you saying?
Well, it's a little oversimplified, but through much of the book so far and much of Jesus' early ministry, as a disciple is to a degree someone who sits under the teaching and the authority of someone else. And surely that's what the relationship was and has been. But I think what Jesus is saying now, and we have to be careful that we don't misinterpret or certainly abuse what he's saying. But he's now saying, because of what I'm about to do, because of this gift, because of this love, our relationship now is like this. You still respect me, and you need to, because I represent the Father, and you certainly need to respect him. But because of what I'm about to do, you are able to receive the same things that I've been able to receive. Whereas before you felt it was like this. Now I'm telling you, no, now we can do this.
That's good. Yeah, David, thank you. Yeah, Carl. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would see it kind of like the setting, going to college. You're a student and you go into a professor's class and you start trying to learn everything he's trying to teach you. But Jesus took it the one step farther. The professor now says to the students, come on over to my house and let's spend some time together. Let's sit down and eat. And it moves into rather than, the disciples were following Jesus all around, trying to learn, trying to see what he was doing. But now Jesus has taken this extra step of a more relationship, I guess I'd call it. They're eating together. They're weep with those who weep, and joy with those who joy, and all of those type of things.
Thank you too, Carl. Well, it just so happens, John, some of our answer is going to be in the next session, where he actually creates a definition for them about what friendship is, versus he uses the slave friend example. We're going to talk about that next time, but these are all really in sync with what my understanding and what I understand through with the commentators. I think this word is actually tied to filio, friendship, and it's almost verbatim in one of my commentaries. It says it connects the idea of one. It's one who is loved, or one that knows he is loved. I mean, it kind of blew me away about what it's the same course of thought. So certainly familial family.
Yes. So Mike, you're a teacher, but we also see Mike as friend.
Yeah.
So in our journey, in our spiritual journey, do we, God, Jesus, do we see ourselves as disciple, follower, or do we see ourselves as friend? What makes people friends? How many friends do you have?
I think anybody else want to take a stab at that?
Part of the answer, John, is I think we'd have to more closely define friends. You look at Jesus and his relationship with disciples, and one of the lessons that is taught through everything he does is a reminder that you cannot be fully a friend and fully invested in a whole great big number of people. As humans, we don't have the capacity to be able to do that on the intimate basis. We can be nice to people, we can acknowledge people, but when it comes to friendship, that requires an investment of time, of course, of one thing, and that kind of energy. And because we're human, in our humanness, that investment is limited. So for me, the key to a true friendship, a real friendship, is an intimate friendship where we're continually laying down the barriers to conversation anything goes, anything is open. And we can't do that with an unlimited number of people. So I think the key is perhaps a deeper phileo. I don't know whether that's a good way to put it or not, but you move beyond the situation of the occasional high and everything's good and you like them and you respect them and everything else, but they're not intimate with you. Those of us who are married, at least in my case, my most intimate, deep friend is my bride, is my wife. But that took a lot of time and a lot of investment, and it's still going on.
That's great.
I don't have the capacity to do that with a dozen people.
Yeah, that's really good, Dave. Yeah. We can be a professor, teacher. We could be a master to several professors at the university, professors. You can have a great memories of a loving professor who's impacted your life, but that can happen without friendship. Friendship is a whole nother level of intimacy where it involves the professor's resources beyond the subject matter into personal experience. That's what he's going to talk about in the next verse. The friend actually lets him know. Lets friends let friends know how friends are feeling, and that's a very loose paraphrase of what we're going to talk about. But it's really, as Dave was saying, he was saying this. And that's really what friendship is involving, is a coming together like this versus a
I
one-sided.
Googled the definition of friend.
Yeah,
A person whom one knows and with whom one has a bond of mutual affection,
mutual.
typically exclusive of sexual or family relations.
That's good. So the idea of mutuality.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Jesus says that this is going to be something different. This is how people are going to know that you're my followers.
Yeah.
This is going to be the mark, right? It's
Yeah.
just not your love for the Good Samaritan kind of thing. It's just not your church love to God, right? He's saying the real, where people are going to see this thing is between each other. This love, this bond, this friend, I like that definition. Something's going to happen and keep pulling you guys onto a different plane, and it has to do with friendship. So we can have a lot of casual, we can have acquaintances, and then we can have casual friends, but we can only, like Dave's saying, have so many friends. But, and Jesus is saying, I call you friends. I don't know about you, but I typically see my relationship with God, Jesus, in another plane, but I think he's calling us to this whole idea of abide in me and, less, right, this connection. It's friendship. So, Steve, you've studied about friends. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know that I've studied about friends, but I certainly concur. You can only have so many close friends. You can have acquaintances, but close friends are limited and, in a sense, sort of rare. I think, though, going back to, and this is probably not really addressing your question, but going back to Carl's statement about how am I loving this person. I think there's another question that goes right along with that, Carl, and that is, how is the person that I'm trying or attempting to love, sort of how do they need or want to be loved?
Hmm.
And we tend to, well, to use something that's been bantered about here and maybe is real useful in the church and elsewhere, is we all probably have a love language, and to be close enough to another person to understand and perceive their love language makes loving more rich.
Oh.
So, my wife was just with a well, she was actually with one of my cousins, and it seems when she came back home last week and they told me about what this cousin was doing for all of these friends that this cousin was with, it's like it was evident to me this cousin's love language is giving gifts, and probably that is the way she most experiences love the most deeply, is to receive a gift. So perceiving others with eyes that are open.
Thank you, Steve. You know, Carl, our thoughts, Steve mentioned it, and definitely me, your opening statement was just so easy to identify with. A great story about a customer and how they've treated you, and you just said, well, gee, maybe it'd be a good idea. And I really resonate with that, Carl, that Steve, you said maybe, yeah, you know, the bulk of my interactions are just entering in and kind of getting the job done, whatever it is, filling up with gas, going in. Well, now you pay at the pump. We used to go into in the gas station, the grocery store, the bank. You know, rather than just going in and getting the job done, Carl, you brought up the question. Maybe it'd be a good idea to ask, what is going on here, and how can I be a part? That might dramatically affect how we treat people, and it may be closer to the truth of what Jesus is encouraging us all to do as his followers. I don't have the energy.
That may take an effort, Mike, because all those examples you used, even us now, you know, we're on Zoom, you know, don't require personal relationships anymore, right? They don't require contact.
Yeah.
Each example you use. So, you know, our way to communicate with people is send a text. Vince loves to get text if you guys want to communicate with Vince. But, you know, the idea, we're getting less and further away from this idea of having real relationships or personal. And I know we're over time, but I don't know if Sterling had a note before, you know, comment. We didn't hear from him yet.
John, you're always drawing me out, so I don't know whether to like that or not, but no, I appreciate that. Well, no, this is you know, I love listening, but I do. I mean, this is what drew me to faith is love. You know, I always had some idea that early Christians, you know, the way that the church grew was based on their love. But exactly what is being said here, you know, you will be recognized by your love for each other, and it certainly was a part of what drew me to faith. Seeing a family friend lost their son, seeing their love and the strength that they got from that. And you know, yeah, I've been a loving person, a giving person, but there is a difference. And, you know, for me now, and I try to live by the fruits of the Holy Spirit and love people. And it's easier to choose the fruits than to not. And I do think we've, as a society, the other thing that strikes me is that our prosperity has created isolation. And I posed the question also to people: what does it exactly mean by a friend in need is a friend indeed? That's an interesting question to ponder. Does the person become your friend because they need you, or are you you know, you're going to give to a friend who needs you? Which way is it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting expression, but sorry for rambling a bit there, but I love is what it's all about. You know, hurt people, love people, people who love each other. You know, if you're loved, you love each other. The transfer that Mike showed us today, that's all, you know, it's essential. I love it. Mike, you did a great job today.
Thanks, Sterling. Yeah. I'm sure having a lot of fun thinking about it. I mean, to the point where it interrupts my sleep at night. I get up I think about this. And that's what I love to do. So thank you guys for coming, and we will meet next week. That'll be the 20th. So we'll just plan on next week. I will check the Zoom link. But if it has expired, there's nothing you have to do, because you have you have that code that we need. We all got into it this morning for that means. So I'll see you next week. Have a good week, fellas.
Happy birthday, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, will
That's
do.
right. Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Yeah.
Very good.
One day
Well, you
you'll
do-
catch Totsy.